So, mousetraps are pretty dangerous, right? If you're not quick enough, you could get trapped. Like that. So, obviously I was not quite fast enough. Slammed on my finger. It actually didn't hurt too bad though, but now we're going to put a pretzel to the test. I'm not going to try to see if I'm quick enough, I'm just going to destroy the pretzel. Ready? Trigger. Whoa! Okay, now we're going to do it again. Grace is going to destroy it. We're going to do it at 10,000 frames per second this time. And go ahead. Okay, and just for you guys, we're going to crank it up again, 25,000 frames a second. And go. So now we have a strawberry wafer. Is that what it's called?
It's like a cookie thing.
A wafer cookie? Yeah, it's really brittle. Are you ready?
Yep.
2,500 frames a second. Go. Oh, it's trapped. And go. We didn't trap it that time. And again, we're going to do the 25,000 frames per second because we like slow motion. Go ahead. Okay, so now we're going to destroy a light bulb, and as you can see, I have safety goggles and I've got my hood on to protect me from shards. Okay, and I have the filament on, as you can see, because we want to see how long this will stay lit before it goes out. 3, 2, 1.
That was lit until after.
Last time I felt some of the shards hit me in the neck, so I'm taking extra precautions. 3, 2, 1. I felt one hit me on the head.
It got dark right when you did it.
What is that string coming out of it? The filament, like, expanded. Do you see that?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what happened. It stretched all the way out. Look. Oh! Yeah, I should probably switch that off. How did that happen? So, if you paid attention to that shot, you could see that the filament actually stretched. And there's evidence for where the mousetrap caught it. Right there. That's a little piece of filament still stuck. And a little shard of glass. That's pretty cool. Alright, and time for our last shot. 25,000 frames a second, smashing or trapping a light bulb. You ready? And 3, 2, 1.
Alright, shut it off.
Yeah, before it ignites in the air again. How did that happen? Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the things we just trapped, but we're going to go inside and take a look at our footage. I would advise each and every one of you to not test your speed with a mousetrap unless you're absolutely certain that you can do it. Because my finger is still a little sore. And actually Grace later ended up getting 2 of her fingers smashed trying to set up one of the mousetraps, didn't you?
Yeah.
I was trying to choose between smashing more items or doing more shots per item, and I ended up doing more shots per item, because usually we stick with like 2,500 and 10,000 frames per second for each shot. And so for these, I actually did 3 different ones, but I only did 3 items. And so, as you saw, the first thing we did was a pretzel rod, which is something that is both like brittle, that can like break apart easily. So that was an obvious choice for something to smash.
We also use pretzel rods a lot.
Yeah, I think we'd used them in the blender episode.
The BB gun episode.
And shooting, yep, we shot with the BB gun. Even with this shot being 100 times slower than normal, this is still happening pretty quickly. And we actually have to kind of do it frame by frame to really see the details. Basically, in rest position, this entire, the trap part of it is resting over here. And you have to pry that back, which stores a ton of potential energy into this spring. But to keep it back here, this bar is laid over it. So now the spring is trying to force this bar up, but this bar is in the way. And to keep this bar in place, you have to put it under this little like lip or ridge that's on this thing right there. And it's very hard to get it in place. And too many times I've accidentally, when I let go, I end up hurting my finger or it just doesn't work. And pushing it rotates this, which slips that out from under the hook right there. And so now this, being pushed up by the bar there, moves out of the way, which allows all of this potential energy to convert to kinetic energy and essentially crush whatever's there. So it being a no-brainer, we're going to have to film this quite a bit slower at a much higher frame rate of 10,000 frames per second. So we're talking 400 times slower than real time. And at this point, we sort of already understand how this mousetrap is working. And to see the bar move and this slam shut is still sort of interesting, but at this point we're really looking at how this pretzel is getting crushed. And so there's actually an equation for how much energy is going to be stored into this spring based on, there's a number that each spring will have where based on how much force it takes it to compress a spring. Each spring has its own constant, and that value is put into the equation. So we have, based on how far this is going to be pushed back, essentially multiplied by whatever constant it has for how difficult it is to do that. And the higher those numbers are, ergo the harder it is to move it, and the farther you move it is going to add more and more and more potential energy. When released, get a ton of kinetic energy. And since this bar is really skinny and contacted at a small point, we have an incredibly high amount of pressure. That's what causes the pretzel to pretty much shatter. I was wondering what the next frame rate I was going to do after 10,000 frames per second, And the reason I decided with 25,000 is because it is a frame rate that we're sort of familiar with on the channel already, having done it with the BB gun episode, and also snapping the CD. We also did 25,000 frames per second there. But not only that, but because the resolution starts to get so small that we only can see a little bit of whatever the camera's aiming at. And if I would have gone much slower than this, the pretzel would fill probably the entire screen, and it wouldn't be really much to look at. So I ended up with 25,000 frames per second. And we get, let's see, about 13 or 14 frames just of this bar moving through the pretzel, crushing it and moving all of the crumbs and everything out of the way, separating these two pieces.
So we were at the store looking for candy canes, actually. And, well, since they only come out mainly around, like, Christmas, and that was a few months ago.
Didn't find any.
We didn't find any candy canes anywhere. So we're going through Dollar Tree, and Bryce spotted wafer bars.
Yeah, strawberry specifically.
And just decided to smash those.
Yeah, and you think of these as being really brittle and fragile, because they can break apart pretty easily. But the first time we snapped it in the mousetrap, and actually a couple times after it didn't actually go all the way through it, which surprised me quite a bit. Because you'd think that a mousetrap being so powerful that it would go through the entire thing with ease. So we can see that at 2,500 frames per second, we had this first frame of it contacting it, and then within 1, 2, 3 frames, it's already stopped it. And then after that, we still had a lot of energy traveling through the wafer, which is why the crack got all the way through it and separated it into two pieces. And then the bar pretty much just sat in this little ridge, and that's what trapped it in place. Yeah, that was one thing I really did not expect. But then you saw the other two shots, it did go all the way through, so. But it was a windy day. You could probably tell from quite a few shots there was a lot of wind, which was sort of helpful because all these crumbs that flew into the air sort of just blew away, which was nice. But yeah, you see that this shot, which being 4 times slower, first frame of contact, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 to 9 frames is stopping it. But then you see that the crack that was produced after it, I guess, was given at an angle where instead of catching the bar, it could sort of just keep slowly sliding on through, and eventually it did make it all the way through. A combination of what angle that crack was at, and also this rotating out of the way, allowing the bar to sort of break through it. So I guess this mousetrap isn't strong enough to break through this all the way, but every now and then the crack that goes through will be in such a way that it'll just fall through the rest. So it's sort of like a chance thing.
So seeing this at 25,000 frames per second actually
Oh, go ahead.
it allows us to get a better idea of how many G-forces is put on the bar.
Because when you're in a car accident, essentially how many G-forces you experience is based on how quickly you decelerate. Since G-force stands for gravitational force, gravity is pulling you at negative 9.81 meters per second squared, which is an acceleration. So if you decelerate at that speed, essentially experience 1 G-force. But if you're traveling really quickly and you hit a concrete wall, you're going to decelerate from 80 miles an hour to 0 miles per hour pretty quickly. And that's why you experience high levels of G-forces. And so we have this bar traveling incredibly quickly. And 25,000 frames per second, we can count 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Anywhere from about 17 to 20 frames, I would say, it's taking this to accelerate or decelerate down to essentially rest before it skips through the rest. Since I don't have any sort of measurement set up behind it, we can't really get, a very accurate measurement of how quickly this thing is traveling. But we can still get the idea that this is decelerating incredibly quickly. That's essentially how you would calculate for how much G-force this is experiencing. Yeah, if you remember from viewer request 2, we smashed a light bulb with a hammer. And so if you enjoy smashing light bulbs or enjoy watching people smash light bulbs, you might enjoy this shot. And you'll remember me saying that I wanted to keep the filament lit to see how long it takes for it to go out. Because inside of this light bulb is essentially a vacuum. And that's good because if this heated coil comes in contact with air and oxygen, it'll burn itself, and that puts out the light bulb. So by keeping air out of the bulb, it allows it to burn in a vacuum, which is good because that preserves the life of it. But once this mousetrap smashes the glass, all this air rushes to fill the void, and that's what causes this to start smoking, because this incredibly high amount of temperature burns the metal that's there, and that's what gives us a lot of smoke. I think this was probably my favorite shot in the entire video. 10,000 frames per second of the light bulb. You can actually see the little metal bar there actually scrapes the bulb just a little bit before the bar comes and slams down. And the reason why this was really my favorite shot is because when I looked at the light bulb after we smashed it, I saw this little string coming out. And at first I thought it was a hair or something because it was really thin. And then I looked at it and it was the filament that had been stretched, and it's right there. And I didn't know it could be stretched that much, but then I thought about it and realized that those coils are really tightly wound. And when you stretch them out, I guess they can get really long. This mousetrap is in the air pulling this thing, and it hasn't snapped or anything, which is pretty incredible. And now, again, that we're doing 25,000 frames per second, the frame's smaller, we're much closer to the bulb, but that's okay because we're just looking at the fracturing of the bulb rather than the action of the mousetrap. So we go from here, 1 frame later, there, again just displaying the sheer speed of how quickly glass shatters. 1/25,000th of a second, a crack's traveled most of the way down the bulb. And then for quite a few frames after, there's still cracks that are traveling and finding their way through the bulb. Yeah, so we only have a couple more episodes left of season 1, so I think you'll really enjoy our next episode actually, because I already know what it's going to be. You know what it is, right? I mean, you'll see. So thanks for watching episode 13 of HighSpeedFanatics, and join us next week for our next episode, and make sure you subscribe. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching this week's episode of HighSpeedFanatics. You can follow us on Twitter at username HighSpeedFans.
You can also find us at facebook.com/HighSpeedFanatics.
If you have any questions or suggestions, please feel free to send us an email at highspeedfanatics@gmail.com.